Medieval law looks like a carnival of oddities until you learn its grammar. At first glance, it's all color policing, midnight bells, and punishments that make modern eyes wince. Up close, those strange rules start to read like a set of answers to questions no one asks today. How do you keep grain from vanishing in a bad year? How do you prevent a peat fire from swallowing a village? How do you tell a free man from a pretender at a glance? Stick with me, like and subscribe if you're the kind of person who likes to argue about why people once wore only certain colors. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and I'll show you the logic hiding beneath the absurdities. You wake before the light, the hut a block of warm shadow, the hearth embers still breathing. The smell is peat and wool. The cat steers clear of your boots. Today, a neighbor comes to try a fur you have secreted from a trade caravan. A small thing, marten pelt, soft as damp moss. You take it, flip it in the morning air, and already you can picture what it would do to your shoulders, give you a shape the other men will notice. Then you remember the mayor's edict tacked to the church door last market week. No man of common standing shall wear ermine or sable, leather and wool only, save by grant of a lord. You tug the fur close and think about the risk. It's not cruelty or mere vanity that put that law in place. It is rank, yes, nobody wanted commoners impersonating the gentry, but also something more practical. Clothing is a currency of trust. If a man of modest means wears rich furs, other men will assume he has acquired them through debt, theft, or illicit trade. The law aims to make status visible because status organizes credit, obligations, and obligations enforceable through neighbors. If you can't read someone at a glance, the village cannot enforce who owes what to whom. So, the mayor's decree is in part an insurance policy written in cloth. Enforcers did not always march in tricorns and badges. Often the first check was social, gossip at the alehouse, a merchant's refusal to sell on credit. But when that failed, the guilds and town officers stepped in. Tailors were watched by guildmasters who kept lists of acceptable trims and materials. A journeyman tailoring a forbidden cuff might find his wages docked, or, in more dramatic cases, his shop padlocked. The punishment rarely targeted mere vanity alone. It aimed at deterrence. Fines were public, penance was visible. The wrong collar could mean weeks of humiliation outside the church after Mass on Sunday, standing in the rain in a white shift for display before your neighbors. The logic is repetitive. Visibility breeds enforceability. Sumptuary rules also served a crude form of protectionism. Authorities, be they kings or city councils, feared the erosion of local industry. If wealthy households bought silks and furs imported from far-off ports instead of paying local weavers and dyers, entire trades shrank. Worse, towns dependent on wool exports could be undermined if nobility laundered foreign cloth into local circulation. So color and fabric laws were economic policy, wearing a moral cloak. They told people what to buy because the community's livelihood was wrapped in what people bought. The mayor's bell rings twice at dawn, a bright metallic knock that folds through alleys and fields like a blunt command. Bells in the medieval world perform the function our phones now do. They organize attention. A bell marks time, announces danger, calls to work, signals market hour, and seals curfew. If a nursery of children can learn to set a spoon against the ear and know what is asked of them, silence, shelter, wake, then law has been translated into sound. You learn that on fire watch. One summer, peat thatch catches in a neighbor's roof. The village runs in bare feet under a sky the color of iron, and the bell has been tolling all morning. There are ordinances about how late fires can burn, about storing kindling, about the positioning of hearths from shared walls. The rules sound petty until you watch a single spark find the wind and start a hunger of heat that takes houses in sequence. A curfew isn't merely moral policing of revelry, it is a municipal precaution. In a tightly packed settlement, one drunk with a torch can set an entire street alight. So councils regulate when and where open flame is acceptable, and they appoint watchers to the bell tower, both to ring and to judge. Punishment for breaking fire laws could be dye in the hair, loss of a weekly ration, or hard labor making repairs. Public, preventive, visible. Not all odd laws are about visible danger. Quarantine rules emerge from different pragmatics. Fear of the unseen, the need to keep trade flowing without collapsing in the face of contagion. Plague does not leave neat footprints, and medieval communities had to balance compassion with survival. When illness struck, towns erected cordons at the street entry, posted sentries, and ordered houses marked with painted crosses or the hanging of wasted cloth. A family could be shut inside while neighbors arranged for deliveries at the threshold. Bells tolled a mournful cadence to alert the living that another house had been sealed. Law here is triage, isolating vectors to protect communal food, seed, and labor. It is a harsh calculus, and it often made grief administrative. Bodies were removed by appointed teams. Burials followed rules designed to prevent mass panic. The language the authorities used, precaution, contagion, common good, sounds reasonable even as it binds small human tragedies to systems of survival. When laws seem cruel, ordeals, public punishments, mutilations, remember that they serve as legible, immediate decisions in a world with few forensic tools. A lord holding court could not reconstruct a dozen alibis, so he offered displays of proof that tied decision to divine favor or public spectacle. Trial by water, fire, or combat is theater that claims certainty by spectacle. The rhetoric was persuasive. If you walk through the flame and are unburned, the logic went, God has pronounced you innocent. We can deride the method and still understand its function. In communities where most disputes are local and verdicts must be swift to prevent feuds, such ordeals resolve conflict quickly, often at the cost of scapegoating the powerless. Across the North Sea, the same need for order meets a different landscape. Open water, sharp wind, and the long fields of ice and stone. Eric the Red leaves his Norwegian home in a fury, or so the sagas record. Whether the quarrel was over honor or debt, the tales vary, but the result is exile. Exile is one of the most compelling engines of medieval Southeast Scandinavian biography. It is punishment and opportunity folded together. For Eric, exile means building a new life where no one recognizes your name, until you make the name mean something. He sails west on a long ship that smells of tar and iron, navigates by sight of bird and cloud, hears the hull creak like a living thing. The sea is a wide argument without a referee. A man either learns its dialect by trial or dies a slow, cold fool. Eric's cunning is partly rhetorical. Upon finding an island of green and rock, he names it Greenland, green as a promise more than a description, and begins what is half marketing and half survival. He organizes the settlers, distributes tasks, and adapts household economics to turf and stone. Turf houses are thick and warm, packed with peat and animal hides. Heat is contained by the same layers that seal in the smell of cooking seal and the woolly sweat of a winter's work. Women tend both house and economy, their hands the engines of seed saving, textile mending, and food preservation. In the sagas, the work sounds small, mending borders and weaving for a new life. But the practical effect is massive. Households that can spin and save can survive 3 poor summers. Eric's story fits a 4-act arc. He is a man shaped by contest, exile, settlement, adaptation, and claim. His naming of Greenland is not mere vanity. It is rhetorical infrastructure. A name persuades potential settlers and creditors. When you call a place desirable, people will travel to it if the risk-reward favors them. For the exiled, marketing is survival. Eric's settlements thrive for a while because they leverage what the landscape offers: whales, seal, and a coastal belt that can be farmed on a modest scale. They trade with Norway and the British Isles, sending walrus ivory and pelts in exchange for iron and timber, things scarce on a rocky shore. Trading networks are the medieval supply chain, slow, fragile, but vital. The settlement's endurance depends upon ships that can carry weight across months of ocean, and men who know which islands shelter shoals safe for anchorage. Back in the village, the guild system constrains movement in other ways. If you are a smith, you do not simply open a shop and beat iron as you please. Guilds set apprenticeships, currencies of time and service, and you must follow a path. Years as a boy under a master, then journeyman travel, then craft-level recognition. These rules restrict, but they also create predictability. A guild ensures that when a lord calls for a plowshare, someone has been trained to make it to a standard. It also protects wages and maintains fair competition by limiting who may set up shop. Guild laws look protectionist, but they are survival strategies for small communities of makers. A sudden influx of cheap foreign wares undermines craft, and with it, the social ecology that keeps a medieval town functioning. You are the apprentice in a smithy, and the master scolds you for an uneven nail. Outside, a man dressed in an extravagant cap passes, the color illegally bright for his station. The guild master spits and gossips to the town crier, and later that man's cap is confiscated and burned. The punishment is meant to be visible and corrective. The cap burned not to hurt the wearer so much as to remind the community what counts as honest work. Public penalties teach through spectacle because literate bureaucracy is rare. Communal memory is the main archive. Not everything can be fixed with fines and flags. Some infractions require ritual restitution, penances that tie the errant back into community. A man who skims grain or cheats in the market may be asked to stand in the marketplace with a loaf of bread, confess his sin, and give the loaf to the angry buyer. The shame produces a currency of accountability, and the ritualized confession rebuilds trust. Law, in this sense, is social repair. Then there are the rules that look bizarre because they try to manage scarcity. Hunting restrictions and game laws. Only certain classes may hunt deer, while others can take rabbits and fish, are not pure aristocratic whim. They are part of a layered economic policy to prevent overhunting on land 10 households might share. Forests and commons are fragile commons. A lord forbids commoners from hunting deer because one rampant winter of unregulated hunting can empty the woods that sustain both game and timber.
Restricting who may hunt large game is a blunt instrument for conservation and for keeping social order when meat is an essential status good. You have seen the logic in food and cloth. Hear it in burial customs too. Graveyards are small and finite. Consecrated ground is a community asset with spiritual and social value. The church regulates burial tightly. You cannot simply bury where you please.
When resources are tight, disputes flare and beget rules. When abundance returns, the rules relax. One night in Greenland, the wind shrieks across the turf roofs like loose rope. Inside, a woman patches a sail by the light of a whale oil lamp. Her hands are stained with lanolin and salt, her voice low as she counts out the days until spring. Men gather to mend line and sharpen blades. They argue over whether to trade an extra seal pelt for iron rivets. Trade routes are tenuous. A storm can cancel a ship and a season. Law and custom become thin. Situational agreements aimed at keeping boats afloat and children fed. Turf and stone are metaphors for resilience. They do not grant comfort so much as shelter. When we interrogate medieval laws, we find repeating motifs. First, visibility. Laws make behavior legible so a community can enforce it. Second, scarcity. Many rules arise to allocate limited goods and maintain vital crafts. Third, symbolic order. Clothing, color, and ritual maintain a social grammar that keeps obligations legible. Fourth, risk management. Bells, curfews, and quarantine translate danger into actionable civic protocol. These motifs do not excuse cruelty, but they explain why a person centuries ago might consider a law sensible rather than peculiar. There are corners where tragedy and policy collide with blunt force. Execution as public punishment binds legal finality to social pedagogy. Mutilation as punishment, hands taken for theft for instance, is a horrifying fact of life in many courts. We should not aestheticize these punishments. Instead, we can see them as part of a legal calculus where visibility, deterrence, and immediate effect were prized above rehabilitative hopes that modern systems might prefer. In a society with limited prisons and costly incarceration, removing a hand was an economy's shorthand for ensuring a specific kind of penalty and restoring public balance. The sagas and chronicles record noble deeds alongside the quotidian laws that shaped lives. In that archive, Eric's and Harold's stories sit next to the lore of the Ugrians and the petty municipal edict about who may bear a dagger in the marketplace. That juxtaposition matters. Grand gestures and small rules meet in the lived experience of people who had to navigate both. Where a king orders a levy, a peasant calculates which ox to sell to meet it. When a storm sinks a ship, a whole year's trade unspools. Remember the peasant with the fur? He does not merely want to look like a lord. He wants a better standing in credit, to borrow seed without shame, to tempt a match for his daughter who will bring a dowry. The law, that odd, blunt instrument, tells him his aspiration is dangerous if its signs are false. So he finds smaller workarounds. He mends a better overcoat from thrifted cloth, learns a neighbor's skill in leatherwork, or seeks a worn badge of service from a lord to attach to the fur.
The tally of the dead translated quickly into ordinary law. Who would hold a plow when the holder was gone? Which widow could claim the corvée owed her dead husband's service? Which lord would press an old claim against a smallhold vacated by slaughter? The household economies that underwrote war did not reset with trumpets. They settled, reluctantly, into quiet litigation and bargaining. Harold, who could move through tents and courts with the same sure foot as he moved through a great hall, found himself three kinds of man at once. By dawn, he was a collector of oaths, those sharp-scented promises sworn over sword or relic. By noon, a negotiator at the earl's table, trading remnant provisions for the oath of a minor then. By night, a registrar of loss, pacing a straw floor and scratching names into a ledger with a bone knife, thinking how to make a claim stick. Each entry in Harold's private tally was a law in miniature, a man's life reduced to who would inherit, who would pay, who would stand guarantor. It is a small thing, and then not. Oaths knit the kingdom when coin and courts could not. The bell, always the bell, meant more in those years than time. It marked markets and proclamations, deaths and summons. After Stamford Bridge, the bell tolled for musters and funerals and for proclamations about levies to repair bridges and towers burned or left to rot by campaigning armies. It tolled when sheriffs were dispatched to take inventories of the shires, when bailiffs were appointed to collect what men owed because the dead could not. The sound was a grammar everyone knew. Its inflection decided whether a summons brought fear or relief. Roads that had once been merely tracks became instruments of law as much as they were thoroughfares of trade. Where a war had cut a region off, a lord would plant a garrison and demand a toll. Where peace returned, markets reconstituted themselves with new charters. Charters were living things. They rode on the breath of the street and the ink of the scribe. A town that swore to keep a fair might, in the next generation, add a clause forbidding foreign packmen from setting up stalls, an embryonic protection for local craft that would harden into the privileges of guilds. Thus, legal ripples radiated outward. A clause to prevent strain on a bridge became a restriction on heavy carts in summer. A privilege to a saltier became a bar against new saltworks. Law became the slow architecture of daily possibility. Across the water, Eric, who had named a claim, who had brought the island's turf into a semblance of a village, found his horizons altered less by a single battle than by a shifting of seasons and ships. The Norse settlements in the far west had always balanced on imported necessities: iron nails, whetstones, good grain in bad harvests. When seafaring lanes narrowed, because a fleet was diverted, a port changed hands, or a winter stayed stubbornly cold, these thin threads of supply snapped.
Each is a node where law and life cross, and each shapes what will be possible for the next generation. When winter settles, it brings with it its own customs of repair and reckoning. Men and women mend that which the year has frayed. They account for what was consumed and what was saved. A fair is held before the snows, and there the law is practiced as much as purchased. The bells speak then of bargains and of debts, of promises made in summer and collected in frost. The merchant with his scales sits farther back now. A new man has taken his stall, one who gives honest measure and gains customers because trust travels faster than coin. Listen, the bell calls again, but not in the same key as before. This toll is a different register, one for a winter market, for a joint decision at the 100 moot, for the naming of an heir. Its sound threads through the timbered houses and the turf roofs and across the frozen fjords. And where it falls, it calls together the patchwork of rules and improvisations that hold a world. In its wake, men and women step out to act, to bargain, to swear, to mend.
The history of law is written in these small, stubborn acts as much as in the edicts of kings. There remain other knots to untie. The formalization of weights into royal standards, the way a guild's custom becomes a municipal statute, the slow drift of a settlement that once lived by whales into a quieter agrarian poverty. There are voyages yet to be made, courts yet to convene, and lives yet to bend law into survival. For now, the bell's echo fades into a night that smells of peat smoke and cold iron, and the market tables are boxed away until the thaw. But the ledger lines, those cautious notches of oath and debt, are already being written for the spring, each one a small claim on the future that will, in time, build the scaffold of something more enduring. When the thaw came, it did so not as a single event, but as a succession of small betrayals. A roof drip here, a thaw-softened lane there, a cat that returned with limbs muddied and a new scratch along the flank. From these betrayals, men and women read the same sign. Where ice yields, so will the schedules and habits that winter enforces. Bargains made at the fair are opened. Claims that were postponed for want of road or witness are taken up. The notch-sticks, kept under lintels through frost, are brought back to light and compared in sunlight. Harold woke one morning to the first smell of thaw, the peat smoke drawn thin and the air sharper somehow for the moisture it carried. In the kitchen, his ledger lay half-closed, its pages splayed like an insect's wing. He turned it with fingers that still remembered the sting of cold, and found a tally he had not meant to carry forward. A debt owed to a fisher's winnow whose husband had been lost that autumn when the nets tangled and the sea kept its appetite.
There are formalizations que preservan liberty, e formalizations that extinguish it. The difference lay in who held the power to change the rules when they bent to unfairness. Out at sea, Eric saw these shifts differently. The barter he practiced, timber for iron, depended on trust that could not always be recorded in the same place. A notch on a stick, a witness sworn under a chapel's eaves, a waxed seal pressed into a strip of vellum. Each was a language the other might fail to read. So he took to carrying, in a little chest beneath the quarter-deck, a set of tokens, simple marked coins and prescribed marks of measurement, that he offered as proof when the foreign lord questioned his delivery. Each token was small and ugly, but when laid before a council of merchants, it often did what arguments could not. It showed that men elsewhere had trusted Eric, and that this trust had left a trail. In time, those tokens, carried in hands and pockets, became things traders expected to see. In that expectation lay the embryo of law. Beyond these meetings and small reconciliations, other changes moved slower, but were no less decisive. The settlement that had lived on whales slid toward fields in a generation because the oil yielded less and the ground had yielded more. As the people turned the soil, they brought with them the record-keeping of the sea, the careful tally of barrels, the marking of shares granted to men who had weathered a hard haul. Those marks took on new forms. Fences drawn not to separate, but to show whose ox had done what work.
agreements over water rights that read like the clauses of an old charter. Thus, a people remade its law by remaking its labor. Yet law remained, always, the product of choice and of necessity. A statute can demand a measure from every scalesmith, but if that measure is blind to the village's particularities, it will be evaded, ridiculed, or turned into a new kind of theft. The richest laws were those that left space for the small customs to breathe, the ones that were enforced by shame and by the pleasure of honorable bearing as much as by the lash or the fine. So the community went on. A young apprentice was read his verdict by the guild elders and sent, after penance, back to the patterns to learn again. The widow kept her cottage because a ledger and a witness saved her from ruin. The captain's multilingual contract became a precedent for those who sailed to the south markets. Harold balanced his need for the widow's relief with the survival of his own household, and found, in the compromise, that the people who lived near him were the better for it. Spring's first fair swelled with this new economy of words and witnesses. The bell rang, not in the thin key of winter's makeshifts, but with a tone that had been tuned by countless notches and oaths.